We have been joined by first the phenomenal Senator from New Jersey, Senator Cory Booker. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's great to be in your presence, gentlemen.
No, thank you. And also, we are also here with my dear friend Tiernan from the League of Conservation Voters, who runs the policy and government relations efforts with Congress and so many other things. Hey, Tiernan.
I thought you were a good hype man. She's the fearless and dominant.
No, listen. Let me make sure for folks who are tuning in, because that's right. If Senator Booker said you got to be a bit of hype, we'll definitely take it up a notch. So you are listening to Think 100%, the coolest show on climate change. And so welcome to you both. But Tiernan, you actually have some amazing news for us. First, can you kind of briefly describe what LCV is and what y'all do for our listeners?
I would love to. Thanks, Rev, for asking. LCV is a national nonprofit environmental organization. Our top priority is fighting the climate crisis. We're working very hard with our 30 state partners across the country to elect environmental champions like Senator Booker, who are going to not just be good votes, but wake up every day thinking, how are they going to protect our air, our land, and our water?
So Tiernan Sittenfeld, who is also the Senior VP of Government Relations at the League of Conservation Voters, you have some amazing news for us today, and I want you to get right into it. And so first,
and can I say one thing? I'm sorry. I'm
no,
terrible. You guys are never going to invite me back because I keep interrupting.
No. You can listen.
I just want to say, because she really downplayed. They not only do they try to elect climate champions, but they really partner with us to try to make change. They think of insightful ways to get folk woke to environmental issues. They corral senators and Congress people to do the right thing, and then what she's going to talk about right now, they hold them accountable, because we often put people in office and they forget where they come from. She makes sure they continue to shine a spotlight that if you cross the line, we're gonna say, tell people that. If you do good, we're gonna tell people that as well.
And that's great. Listen, for me also, I'm also serve on the board of LCV, so you can always give as many accolades and say all the great things that the league does. So please take your time on that. We're all right. We're okay with that. You know what I mean?
We're absolutely okay with that. One of my very favorite senators, one of my very favorite board members. Of course, Mustafa is one of my very favorite people in general. So we are
no qualifications of Mustafa.
Period. We don't get with you in a second. Tiernan, do your thing.
All right, so we are really excited because we are right now on the coolest show on climate.
That's right.
Yep, we are so excited that we are releasing our Communities First, our report on environmental leadership from Caucuses of Color. It's now live on our website at lcv.org/communitiesfirst, so we hope people will check it out. But it shows the scores of the 93 members of Congress who are part of either the Congressional Black Caucus, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, or the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus. And I'm really proud to say that of the 93 members, 77 of them across the three caucuses, known as the Tri-Caucus, scored 90% or higher. Wow. So that is absolutely excellent.
And let's say, why with this, so for folks who are listening, tell them first about there's a larger scorecard for the entire Congress, and then there was this scorecard. So kind of explain the first scorecard for everyone, and then why this one is so important.
There's the scorecard across the board where we evaluate, as Senator Booker was saying, every member of Congress, how they vote on the most pressing environmental issues of the day, whether it's climate change or clean energy or environmental justice. And I actually am really disappointed to say that the Republicans outdid themselves. They did the worst ever. Literally, the Senate Republicans averaged a 1% on the 2017 scorecard. It means that 99 times out of 100, they voted against the environment, against public health, against the air we breathe and the water we drink. And so that is absolutely unacceptable. And that's why we wanted, with all the bad news coming from the Republican leadership in Congress, that was reflected in our scorecard.
Hold on. That just hit me.
I thought about
it too.
Hold
on. If my sons came home and they're on their report card, they said, how do you do in school? We got a 1%.
Yeah.
You had to try hard to get a 1%.
Right? It's unbelievable. I mean, it truly is breathtaking, literally.
And it wouldn't be so bad if it wasn't the fact of the matter that we're dealing with clean air. and clean water. And that, as you know, for those who are listening, who know me, listen to the show, this is not about Republicans or Democrats. This is about humanity. When I served in the Air Force as an officer, I didn't serve for one side or the other. I served because I was fighting for Americans. And so I can't understand how, and to what you're saying here, that people who know that folks are getting polluted and getting bad water and bad air are failing that bad.
And I still remember watching it happen once early in this administration when they were rolling back. It was a CRA on disposal of industrial mine waste.
Yes.
Wow.
And I was stunned that you have communities that are red states, places like West Virginia, where West Virginians, New Jerseyans, we all deserve clean water. And we were just rolling back rules that were stopping large corporate coal companies to pour their wastes into rivers and streams. It was stunning to me. This wasn't, and again, I've been a mayor, and sometimes you run up against environmental interests, you're trying to balance things all the time. This was such a clear black and white. Do you believe people should have access to clean water, or should these treasures, these streams and these rivers in communities should we be allowed to have sort of unregulated dumping? I was sort of stunned at that one.
It's shocking. Fortunately, Senator Booker makes
Well, I was going to say now before Senator Booker gets on the soapbox, we gotta hear his score
My
first.
score.
Okay,
It's the moment of accountability.
we got so Tiernan, what was Senator Booker's score?
So I am proud to say Senator Booker got a perfect score of 100%.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Perfect score, 100%.
My earphones aren't working. Could you say that again?
2017, absolutely perfect. His lifetime score is 98%, which is really impressive. So yes, we are very proud of him. We're delighted. But also Senator Booker and many others who are part of these congressional caucuses of color are not just good votes. So Senator Booker teamed up with Congressman Ruiz from California on the House side to introduce the Environmental Justice Act of 2017. Of the votes that we scored, most of them, because the Trump administration and the Republican leadership are so terrible, most of the votes that we scored were bad votes to harm the environment. So in most cases, the correct vote was to vote no. There were 4 pro-environment amendments. 2 of those were offered by members of congressional caucuses of color. For example, Congressman Ellison from Minnesota offered an amendment to protect the air that we breathe, which is especially important in low-income communities and communities of color. Congressman Grijalva from Arizona introduced an amendment to restore environmental justice funding, which of course is so important for so many reasons. So although there's so much bad news coming out of Washington and the attacks that we see from Scott Pruitt, there is good news. I'm here with good news today, which is so refreshing, right?
That's right. And I like also the fact that this highlights for folks that the false narrative that people of color are not engaged or committed around the environment, especially those folks who have been, brought into office. So I'm so thankful that you guys are highlighting that.
Thank you. I mean, I think there absolutely is this sort of false narrative out there because communities of color, low-income communities are hit first and worst by pollution, by environmental racists, and Senator Booker has spoken so eloquently about this. I'm sure he's going to continue to. It is so encouraging and exciting to see so many members of Congress standing up and saying enough is enough and fighting for real solutions that are good for our economy. They're creating jobs, they're helping consumers, and we're just so excited to be working. There's a new environmental justice task force on the House side led by 3 members. We're excited to work with them, with people like Senator Booker, because there's so much opportunity here.
So Senator Booker, you got 100 and you're on the Think 100% show, so just all together. And so, first of all, congratulations on that. That's amazing. And I mean that because people can't see on the radio, but I'm wearing a Flint hat. I was with Little Miss Flint this past weekend. But why is protecting the environment so important to you? And more importantly, to the citizens of the great state of New Jersey and everyone out there?
Well, for me, this is very personal. I'm the only senator that lives in an inner city community. Median income in my community is $14,000 per household. I live in Newark Central Ward. Proud of my community. My community is rich with potential, rich with character. It's a great neighborhood, but I see firsthand in my 20 years living in this community that these environmental issues hit hard into communities of color, to low-income communities around this country. But I saw it when we first in Newark when I became mayor, I wanted to do with the food desert. So one of the things I said, we got land, we can get seeds, let's create urban farms. And then the state environmental agency stopped us from planting in the soil because the soil was toxic. We know that the air is toxic because communities of color, again, if you're African American in America, you're 3 times more likely that your children are going to be hospitalized due to asthma and have these kind of respiratory problems, and that's the case in Newark. The water is poison. Our Passaic River, they used to dump all kind of chemicals, including Agent Orange, and it is a Superfund site. So imagine growing up in a community where you are alienated from your air, from your soil, from your water, when it's all toxic. Kids in Newark, kids in Camden still drinking out of bottled water because of lead in the water. Flint, Michigan is a travesty, but not an anomaly.
That's right.
There's, as Reuters reported, over 1,000 jurisdictions in America where children have twice the blood lead levels than the kids in Flint. So I saw that my children were growing up in Newark in a environmentally toxic area, and we needed to talk about the urgency of environmental justice. The rates of cancer, the rates of autism, the rates of birth defects, the rates of respiratory diseases, all these things you see more impacting low-income communities and communities of color. And it doesn't have to be this way. When I saw that these communities are often the ones with incinerators, often the ones that have Superfund sites, often the ones where we're not making the investments to clean the water.
Right.
And so this was a issue I fought against as mayor, but when I became a United States Senator, I felt like I had a bigger purview, not only in Newark, but now up and down my state. I saw the same thing. The lower income communities more likely to have environmental hazards in their community. And then I saw in America, black, white, rural, urban, we have common pain, but we needed to start understanding we have this common purpose as well. And so I set out to visit other communities that are very different than Newark often, but that are suffering from some of the same challenges. Like I went to Duplin County, North Carolina. North Carolina has about 9 million pigs, these massive corporations, hog corporations, the biggest of which is a Chinese-owned corporation, Smithfield. And there's so many of these hogs, they have no place to put the effluents. Pigs produce 9 times the amount of effluents, feces that human beings do. And while in New Jersey we have 9 million people, they have 9 million pigs. We have waste treatment facilities down there. They have no place to put the stuff. They put in these massive lagoons that happen to be where? Low-income communities, communities of color. Going down there to see it with my own eyes, the stench in those neighborhoods. You see the spray fields where they spray this stuff over the field. It mists over into communities. And sitting around a table of activists, environmental activists, most of them African American, telling me just horrible stories. They can't open the windows, they can't run their air conditioning, can't put their clothes on the line, respiratory problems, cancers. They're prisoners in their own home. I moved on. Mustafa and I went through Alabama together. And again, anguishing realities we see in places like Tallahassee, Alabama, Uniontown, Alabama, where you see again these toxic coal ash that was considered a toxic hazardous waste dumped indiscriminately in a community that had no say over these hazards put into their community. You see again folks who've had their land stolen from them, not in a literal sense, but the value of their land's gone way down because these hazards have been put into their communities. And so when you have places like St. James Parish in Louisiana along the Mississippi River, literally the nickname, you don't even need to look up St. James Parish, look up Cancer Alley, because again, you have these industrial chemical companies that when I arrived, we looked at the EPA data, dozens.
Yeah, but also to understand, break it down for me with that. When you say Cancer Alley, what does that mean?
Along the Mississippi River, this stretch of the Mississippi River, they have these toxic chemical companies that are putting this stuff into the air. When I arrived, we saw the data, the scientific data, about multiple times higher rates of chemical pollutants in the air. When we met, it was really one of the most, it was the end of this long trip. Mustafa and I was with me for much of it, sitting in this small church on land that people have been on since slavery, and having my elders come into this church, so excited, not to see me, but just that a federal official would come down.
Wow.
And telling stories that I had to fight back tears listening to how many people know folk who died of cancer or spoke who had cancer themselves. literally being poisoned. The air is being poisoned. None of the people who own that company would ever let their families live next to the factories where they're expecting other people to live. And so there is a screaming urgency in this country where we are literally poisoning people and allowing that to happen and go unabated, disproportionately impacting a low-income folk, disproportionately impacting people of color. And it's one of those areas of the environmental movement that we don't talk about. I hear a lot of talk about climate change, as there should be. But when you talk about inherently, right now, our children are being poisoned by lead. Right now, our children, think about this, just this week, and I'm so angry about this, the EPA under Scott Pruitt have rolled back the flow that was to ban a chemical called chlorpyrifos. Now this chemical is sprayed on our food, it's sprayed on fields. Other countries have banned it. We know it does terrible things to the immune systems of children. It's on the apples, corn, and we were moving to ban it. And what happened with the EPA? They decided to study it more, which is a delay tactic, 5 more years. And if you're an agricultural worker, I sat with agricultural workers in New Jersey and listened to their problems that they have because they're directly exposed to these chemicals, not to mention them being passed down to our children. What do we value more in this country? The health and well-being of our kids or a short-term profit? And the reason why I say short-term profit, because free concepts of the free market are being violated. A product, a good, is supposed to represent the full cost of that good.
That's right.
But instead of what's happening when they're producing these things, they're passing the costs on to the public at large. The Passaic River by my home, it's been stolen from we can't swim in that Passaic River anymore. You used to go fishing if you were poor in Newark a century ago. You go fishing, clamming, all of that. This public good was stolen by corporations in the name of profit, when really they were stealing and passing on the costs to future generations. Well, that's happening right now. Do you know the economic damage to our country for not lead poisoning, but just elevated blood lead levels? Because what it does is it is directly related to low achievement in schools, inhibiting your executive function, which now that kid's going to get in trouble, suspended for acting out when really they're addled by lead. What it does to the economic potential of the most valuable unit of production in a global knowledge-based economy, the most valuable unit of production is a human being. And now we are saddling human beings with we're poisoning them and inhibiting the ability for our children to succeed. Not to mention, again, the other cost that these corporations are outsourcing onto us is just healthcare. Cancer is expensive.
That's right.
To send people to emergency room, to have them get treatments, what that's doing to our economy. So this isn't the free market. This isn't corporations taking responsibility for the cost of goods and passing them on to those who are purchasing those goods. This is the lowering the cost of their production by outsourcing the costs onto all of us who are breathing in the noxious fumes, who have it in our water, who have it in our soil, and stealing from past generations. And so if you're a free market person, if you're just if you're a fiscal conservative, if you believe government spending should be lower, because remember, Medicaid, Medicare, all these things have cost.
That's right.
There's morally, economically, American competitiveness. Why are we letting the Chinese outsource their pollution to us in the pork production industry on places like Duplin County and take the finished product? It's almost like the colonialism of old now happening to us through Chinese companies. So I don't care what perspective you're, a fiscal conservative, a libertarian, if you're a believer in the moral values of this country, it violates every principle there is, all in the name of short-term profits, long-term costs.
Senator Booker, one thing that I really appreciate about you is that you actually get in it. And what I mean by that is that you go to the places, you spend time with the folks. And all the administrations I work for, I used to always say, if you're going to create policy, then you need to actually understand what's really going on the ground. And I really appreciate that. So I know that you, along with Congressman Ruiz, created the Environmental Justice Act of 2017. Can you talk a little bit about how that will impact our most vulnerable communities?
Yeah, but,
and what that is.
Sure.
Yeah.
But first of all, you're kind of messed up because
Yeah.
what he's saying about me, it's the truth about him too. And you both are activists. You know, one of my favorite books, In Search of My Mother's Garden by Alice Walker, she says the true revolutionary is always concerned with the least glamorous stuff, raising a child's reading level, filling out food stamp forms, because folk
right.
eat revolution or not. The real revolutionary is always close enough to the people to be there for them when they're needed. You all are grounded and rooted in your communities, and you and I, it was a great trip that I took with you. You know, you have a what's the old saying? Who you are speaks so loudly I can't hear what you say. I just saw the way you dealt with folk and connected with folk. I really appreciate that. The Environmental Justice Act was not written by me in a bubble. It was really written in partnership with some of the best organizations, one of which is the one you're on the board of, and other grassroots environmental groups, where we ask them what they need in federal legislation. And so the wisdom, and again, Mustafa is one of those folks who was inside a progressive administration, saw what was needed, and we incorporated ideas, one of which, again, comes from Mustafa's experience, which is, hey, codify a lot of these executive orders in legislation that we're dealing with environmental justice, so they're not just swept away by unfriendly administrations such as the one we have right now. Give power back to the people.
That's right.
By letting individuals or communities take legal action that was eviscerated by Supreme Court decisions so that they can file lawsuits to protect themselves from the environmental harm. Wouldn't that be great if the people in Newark themselves could be suing companies? For federal permitting, you know, when you just say, I want to put a plant here, you can look at that one plant in isolation and say, okay, you get a permit. But what we do in this bill is say, no, you have to look at the totality of the circumstances in which you're putting that into the community. So look at the cumulative impact of that specific plant, because now you have to suddenly realize that plant is next to an incinerator, which is next to a crisscrossing of highways. All of these things create a larger environment that is unacceptable, so we're not going to issue that permit. So this is a piece of legislation that does a lot of things, from empowering the communities to be able to fight back, to creating more restrictions on federal agencies to have to take into account environmental justice and make sure the progress that people like Mustafa did, who were in the belly of the beast, serving administration, a lot of the things they fought for, hard ground that they won. Because remember, we're in the moonwalk phase, Michael Jackson's moonwalk phase, where you see voting rights being taken away, women's rights being taken away. A lot of these gains, we're losing them. So we want to make sure when we gain ground, we cement that ground, and that's what this legislation is trying to do.
So can you talk a little bit, you know, in the climate movement, the environmental movement, sometimes folks have a disconnect between the voting process or a civic process, if you will. Can you talk about how important that is if we're serious about winning on these issues?
Yeah, I think that we all hear it. When I campaign for my colleagues, or even for Secretary Clinton, I go around the country, and sometimes I'm sitting in that barber chair, but you guys are laughing like, Booker, you don't got any hair to cut. I still have to shave with stubble every once in a while.
I see it. I see it.
Okay, these are mean people over here. But sitting in that barber chair, and I get cynicism from the community. It's like, you know, why are we voting? Nothing changes. Why are we voting? And I usually have to break it down to them, all the things that the Obama administration had done that they may not see immediately. But it means a lot that you have access to health care that you didn't have before. You can't be denied health care. It means a lot that the Obama administration got resources to my community in Newark to help us with affordable housing. You can go through the things that people might not realize, but in Newark I could point to parks, to housing, to things that we appreciate in our community. And so we've got to understand that there is this design going on. I just came back from Florida on Sunday, where 1 in every 5 black people can't vote because of felony disenfranchisement. Mm-hmm. Now they have, if you're listening to this in Florida, there is a ballot initiative to change the Constitution. They need 60% threshold to get there, so please vote. But people wonder, well, how did that happen? Well, if you go back to the original state legislative debates about why this was happening, it was designed to prevent African Americans from voting. Mm-hmm. And so whether it was a century-old legislation, laws that have prevented blacks to vote, to the rolling back of the Civil Rights Act, to voter restriction laws like voter ID laws, or pulling out polling places from certain communities, or needing an ID, all of these things are working to suppress the votes of poor folks, of minority folks, and others. And why is that? It's because when Alice Walker said, again, I keep quoting her, sage sister, when she says that the most common way people give up their power is not realizing they have it in the first place. Yeah. Is if African Americans, in this last Clinton election, if African Americans had voted about 85% or so of the Obama level of voting in places like Michigan, we would have President Clinton right now. Mm-hmm. And so we can decide the outcome of events. And I'll give you the example close to home for me. In 2008, when I went to vote for Obama in Newark, line around the polling place, I get up at the end of the line, I'm mayor of the city, there's no niceties. The woman at the end of the line looks at me and says, "Don't you think you're cutting in this line now?" No hello, mayor, how you doing? And I wait long time to vote. 1 year later, it's a gubernatorial election, a governor's election. I go no line, I walk in, hug the poll worker because she looks so lonely. And then Chris Christie edged out our incumbent Democrat. What's one of the first things he did? He pulls us out of regional greenhouse gas agreements, which is to stop that toxic air often coming from coal plants from coming into our communities. Regional agreements. Not only did he cut Planned Parenthood, cut the earned income tax credit, and everybody wants to say to me, when they see these things happening, why are the Republicans doing this to us? And I'm like, the Republicans didn't do this to us. We did it to ourselves, because the opposite of justice is often not injustice, it's inaction, it's apathy, it's indifference. And so this is a moment in American history where the importance of voting has never been greater. I've now seen, unfortunately, as a senator, what one vote can do. I look at the times that the vice president has had to come in and break ties. He was there today, breaking another tie. And guess what this tie that he came to break was? Auto dealers and their ability to discriminate based upon race. We've seen through studies that different credit is given to different people, not on their credit worthiness, but on the color of their skin. And so if you think that the things that are happening don't matter, that one vote in the Senate, one Senate seat, could make a difference between Betsy DeVos, that had to be that tie had to be broken by the vice president. And so all of these elections really do matter, and they matter especially when it comes to fundamental things like our health and safety. What Scott Pruitt is doing right now, rolling back the Clean Air Act, rolling back the Clean Power Plant, you can literally measure the number of the amount of tons of these substances that are going to be put into our air, and those correlate not just to asthma rates, but they correlate to death rates of the amount of the toxins being in the air. And so, and who dies from these things? It's usually the most vulnerable people. I love how you said the first and the worst. It hits first to the communities that are vulnerable, and it often hits them worst.
Yeah. And I know, man, this was an amazing show. We actually, if you're tuning in, you're listening to Think 100%, the coolest show on climate change, and I think this might be our last question. Maybe we get one more, but I actually want to give you this question this way. I want you to, because we both know you, and you are phenomenal. Thank you for your service. Thank you for getting your 100% on the LCV's
I appreciate that.
Scorecard. But right now, we're in a time where Americans are hurting. Young children were marching for our lives. When Dr. King marched for jobs and justice, right, for equality, we now have children who are fighting and marching for existence. People are upset and marching because people of color just feel everywhere they go, their lives could be at risk. You have things going on where, man, this EPA and their folks yelling boot Pruitt every single day because they just can't believe that he would continue to do what he's doing. If you can just, not just even as Senator Booker, but just as just an American, knowing that people are hurting, and you could just speak to them right now on this show, what would you want to tell them?
Well, this is the last thing I'll say. I first want to say that pay attention to what people say about other folks, because it's often more a reflection of them than who they're talking about. And I listen to the way Donald Trump talks about other people. That's more a reflection of who he is than of the people he's criticizing. But if the flip side goes, you said some kind words about me, and I think that says a lot more about you and your graciousness, your grace, than it does about me. So thank you for those words, but I push them right back on you. within days of the Parkland shooting, Shahad Smith on my block was murdered with an assault weapon, top of my block. I see folk in my community who have every reason to be angry, and anger is a productive emotion, every reason to be cynical, every reason to be to hurt. And I always say, if America hasn't broken your heart, you don't love her enough. We all should be hurting right now. But I just want to just close with the woman on the 5th floor of the project, Miss Virginia Jones, who was my tenant leader when I lived in Brick Towers for about 10 years. The high rises at the top of the street where I lived, and Shahad lived in those buildings with me. And she taught me that hope is relational. You cannot have great hope without great despair. That hope is the active conviction that despair will not have the last word. And her son was murdered in the 1980s in the building I would eventually move into, and she never left. Now, she and I were two of the highest net worth earners to live in these low-income housing. She refused to leave because she loved the community so much, despite her pain, despite her hurt. And I remember one of my worst days in my journey as an adult was in 2004. The first time I'd ever been, a young man was shot. I was right there trying to stop him from bleeding to death. It is one of the most gruesome things in the world that you've ever seen. Foaming blood coming out of his mouth, blood pouring from his chest. And I still remember the chief of police, the police director for the mayor I ran against was there. To this day, he says I looked in shock. And I still remember what Miss Jones did to me. I wept through the night, angry at my country, blackness filling my heart and soul. Next morning, I come out and I see Miss Jones across the courtyard. She opens her arms for me. She didn't even say a word. She just knew I was hurt, and I ran over. She hugged me, held me. I started crying again. She rubbed my back. She said two things over and over again to me. It's just two words over and over. She said, "Stay faithful, stay faithful, stay faithful." And so we've come this far by faith, man. We've gone. Our ancestors have gone through worse trials, but they stayed faithful. That worse heartbreak, worse tragedy, they stayed faithful. And we can't give up now. We've got to carry this torch. The short time we're going to be holding, we've got to gain some ground and hand it to the young folk and let them run with it.
So in the last 30 seconds, as we begin to close out, can you talk a little bit about what folks are going to get? Because you got a hot new podcast that people are talking about on the street, which is important. And then can you also share with us, because you can't come on the Hip Hop Caucus Think 100 show and not share with us who your favorite hip hop artists are.
Oh my God.
So I'm going to give you 30 seconds to knock that out.
Well, I'm going to tell you who I've been listening on repeat. I'm embarrassed I didn't know him, but I've been listening to Frank Ocean recently. Like, I don't know how I missed him. My Spotify over and over and over again. If you want to listen to my podcast, it is Lift Every Voice, from obviously the James Weldon Johnson song, which is some maybe precursor to hip hop, but the man who wrote the Negro National Anthem, and so for me, hip hop has been we're the hip hop generation, which I always like, sampling the old and innovating on the new. I think the music speaks to the status of sort of ex-geners in this country and the challenges there are. So I'm a guy that is ecumenical in my listening. So everybody from Common to Talib Kweli to more common, more recent stuff. I was happy. Who won the Pulitzer Prize? I mean, that was amazing, and shows you how hip hop and rap is really going global and mainstream.
Thank you so much. Thank y'all so much.